It was late in the afternoon when the streets began to cool down after a long, busy day. People hurried home, holding their coffee cups, tapping their phones, or rushing to catch the last bus. Among them sat a man who seemed invisible to everyone. He was sitting quietly near a small square, where an old piano stood under a worn-out shelter. The piano was chipped, some keys were broken, and the paint had faded from years of rain and sun. But it still stood there, waiting for someone to play it again. The man's clothes were old and torn, his face rough from the wind and dust. He had a small blanket and a paper cup beside him. People passed by without looking. Some avoided eye contact. Others crossed to the other side of the street. To them, he was just another homeless person trying to make it through another day. But inside that man was something no one could see. Beneath the silence, there was a storm of memories, of music, warmth, and dreams that once felt so close. He hadn't touched a piano in years. Life had pushed him so far away from who he used to be that he could barely remember what it felt like to play. But that afternoon, something changed. A young volunteer had placed that old piano there for anyone who wanted to play, to bring a bit of life to the empty square. Most people ignored it, but when the man saw it, something inside him stirred. He looked at it for a long time, almost afraid to touch it, as if it belonged to another life he could never return to. He sat quietly for a while, his eyes fixed on the instrument. The noise of the street faded away. A soft wind brushed past him, carrying with it a faint memory, the sound of notes, laughter, and applause from years long gone. His fingers twitched slightly. He felt the urge to touch the keys, but fear held him back. What if he couldn't play anymore? What if his hands, now rough and stiff, couldn't remember the softness of the notes? He waited until the crowd thinned. Only a few people lingered nearby, chatting or taking photos of the sunset. Slowly, he reached out and touched the piano. The wood felt cold under his fingers. He pressed one key. A dull sound came out, slightly out of tune, but still alive. He pressed another, then another. The sound was uneven, but it stirred something deep inside him. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and began to play. The first few notes were shaky, uncertain, like a whisper trying to find its voice. But as his fingers moved, the music began to take shape. The sound grew warmer, stronger. Each note carried emotion, pain, longing, hope. Everything he had locked away for so many years. The melody floated through the air, reaching the ears of those nearby. A woman walking past stopped. She turned around, curious. A man standing by the bus stop looked up. Slowly, people began to gather. The sound didn't come from a professional musician wearing a suit or playing in a concert hall. It came from a man sitting on the ground, dressed in worn clothes, lost in his own world. But the way he played, it was different. It was real. His fingers moved across the keys like they had a life of their own. Each note seemed to tell a story of someone who once had everything, then lost it all, yet still carried beauty within him. His head bowed slightly, his eyes closed, his whole being wrapped in the sound. For those few minutes, he wasn't a homeless man. He was an artist, a storyteller, a soul speaking through music. The people watching felt something they couldn't describe. It wasn't just the melody. It was the emotion behind it, the kind that makes you stop whatever you're doing and just listen. A mother holding her child slowed her steps. A teenager filming with his phone lowered it for a moment, just to listen with his heart. Even the wind seemed to quiet down. As the song flowed, tears welled up in the man's eyes. The memories he had buried for years came flooding back. His small apartment filled with music sheets, his friends cheering him on, the soft laughter of someone he once loved. He remembered how proud he felt the first time he played in front of an audience and how life slowly took that away piece by piece. One mistake, one bad decision, one moment of bad luck, and everything began to fall apart. He had promised himself he'd find his way back. But time moved on and the world forgot. Yet here he was again, after all those years, playing on a broken piano in the middle of a busy street. And for the first time in a long while, he felt alive. The melody reached its peak, soft yet powerful, echoing off the walls of nearby buildings. People stopped talking. They just stood there listening. Some recorded with their phones, others stood silently with tears in their eyes. No one had expected that sound to come from a man who looked like he had nothing left. When he finally stopped, there was silence. A long, deep silence that seemed to stretch forever. Then someone began to clap. Another joined, then another, until the square filled with the sound of applause. The man slowly opened his eyes, confused at first. He hadn't realized a crowd had gathered. He looked around, surprised to see so many faces watching him with warmth instead of pity. He smiled faintly, his hands still resting on the keys. Someone shouted, "That was beautiful!" Another asked, "What's your name?" But he just shook his head softly and whispered, "Doesn't matter." His voice was gentle, barely louder than the wind. For a moment, everyone stayed, not wanting to leave. Then, one by one, they drifted away, still talking about what they had just heard. A young woman stayed behind, still holding her phone. She had recorded the whole thing. She approached him and said, "That was amazing. People need to hear this." He didn't say much, just smiled, his eyes a little brighter than before. When she walked away, the man looked down at the piano again. The streetlight flickered above him, casting a warm glow on his face. He ran his hand over the keys once more and played a few soft notes, slow, peaceful, like a goodbye. He didn't know that the video she had just taken would travel far beyond that small square. He didn't know that by the next morning, his music would be heard by millions of people around the world. All he knew in that quiet moment was that he had found a small piece of himself again. The night grew colder, but he didn't feel it as much. Something inside him was warm now. He sat there a little longer, watching people pass, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Then he leaned back against the piano and closed his eyes, a small smile still on his face. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about where he would sleep or what he would eat. He was thinking about music, about how a few broken notes could bring back so much life. Somewhere, deep inside, he felt a spark, the kind that tells you maybe, just maybe, things can change. The streetlight flickered once more, and the man sat quietly beside the piano as the city around him carried on, unaware that a small miracle had just begun. The next morning began like any other. The city woke up to the sound of traffic, rushing footsteps, and morning chatter. But for one man sitting near the piano in the small square, something felt different. He didn't know that his music from the night before had already started to travel far beyond those streets. He sat quietly, his old blanket wrapped around him, watching people pass by. He had played for himself, not for an audience. He had no idea that a young woman had uploaded his video online the night before, a video that would change everything. Across the city, that same young woman sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone in shock. The short clip she had posted just before going to bed was spreading fast. People were sharing it, commenting on it, and asking, "Who is this man?" The melody had touched hearts around the world. Some said it reminded them of loss, others said it gave them peace. By mid-morning, thousands had seen it. The man in the square, however, had no phone, no access to the internet, and no clue that his life was about to take an unexpected turn. He spent the morning like he always did, walking around quietly, collecting small coins and sitting near the same corner when he got tired. The piano stood there silent for now. He looked at it from time to time, wondering if yesterday's music had really happened or if it was just a dream. When the sun climbed higher, he decided to play again. The street wasn't as crowded yet. A few people were having coffee nearby. A couple of tourists were taking photos. He sat down slowly, adjusted the old stool, and rested his fingers on the keys. He began with a soft tune. This time his hands didn't tremble. The first few notes flowed gently, almost like a morning breeze. He wasn't playing to impress anyone. He was just playing because it felt right. Each sound carried warmth, a quiet honesty that could touch anyone who listened. Soon a few heads turned. Someone from the cafe walked closer, holding their cup, eyes wide with surprise. Another person took out their phone. The melody grew deeper, more emotional. He played as if telling the story of his entire life, the joy of his youth, the pain of loss, the loneliness of the streets, and the strange peace he found in music again. Within minutes, people started to gather. Some sat on benches. Others stood quietly, drawn by the sound. The air seemed to shift. Even cars slowed down as the notes filled the square. The man's eyes stayed closed. He wasn't aware of how many people were around him now. He was somewhere else, in his memories, in his own small world where the music still lived. Someone whispered, "Is this the same man from the video?" Another replied, "Yes, it's him. He's incredible." Word had started spreading through the city. People who had seen the clip online came hoping to hear him in person. A few of them even brought small gifts: a sandwich, a bottle of water, a cup of coffee. When the song came to an end, the crowd clapped again, louder this time. He opened his eyes, a little confused but touched. He wasn't used to being noticed, let alone appreciated. Someone said softly, "You have a gift." The man smiled faintly. He didn't speak much, but he nodded in gratitude. He played again, a different tune, something brighter, lighter, as if a bit of hope had returned to his heart. People smiled. Children clapped in rhythm. Even strangers began to talk to each other, united by the same sound. For a while, that small square didn't feel like just another city spot. It felt alive. Nearby, a street cleaner paused his work to listen. A man in a suit, rushing to a meeting, stopped for a minute and took out his phone to record. Everyone seemed to forget about time. The man at the piano had become the heart of the street, someone who reminded people of the beauty they often walked past every day. When he finished, people dropped coins and small bills near his blanket, but he barely looked at them. He didn't play for money. He played because music was the only thing left that made him feel human. By noon, a small local news reporter arrived. She had seen the video too and wanted to find him. She approached slowly, not wanting to disturb his peace. "That was beautiful," she said softly. He gave a small nod, unsure what to say. "People online are looking for you," she continued. "Your video went viral overnight. Millions have seen it." He blinked, trying to understand her words. Viral? Millions? He didn't quite believe it. It sounded impossible. He had spent years being invisible, forgotten by everyone. How could people suddenly care? The reporter smiled kindly. "Would you mind if I ask you a few questions?" she asked. He hesitated, then quietly said, "I don't have much to say. I just play." She didn't press. She asked where he learned, what music meant to him, and if he ever imagined something like this could happen. He spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully. "I learned long ago," he said, "when life was different. I stopped for many years, but yesterday I played again. I guess the piano never forgot me." The reporter smiled. "That's beautiful," she said, recording his words. "Do you mind if we share your story? People would love to help you." He looked down, unsure. "Help me?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine here, I just play." She thanked him and promised to come back later. By evening, her short interview clip was online. The story spread even faster. Comments flooded in from people around the world. Some offered to help him find a home. Others wanted to buy him a new piano. Many simply said thank you for reminding them of kindness, of hope, of beauty hidden in unexpected places. As the sun began to set, the man stayed by the piano, unaware of how famous he had become. The crowd had grown larger than before. Someone had placed a small candle near him. Another left a flower on the piano top. The square glowed softly under the evening lights. He played one last tune for the day, slow, emotional, and filled with gratitude. People listened quietly, some with tears, others holding their phones high to capture the moment. But what they didn't realize was that for him, it wasn't about attention. It was about peace. Every note he played healed a small piece of the emptiness that had lived inside him for so long. When the final note faded into the cool air, the crowd clapped again. A little boy ran up and hugged him. He froze for a second, surprised, then smiled gently and patted the boy's shoulder. The mother pulled the boy back, embarrassed, but the man said softly, "It's okay." For a moment, the crowd saw not just a musician, but a human being who had found his way back to the world through sound. As night fell, the square slowly emptied. The man sat quietly, watching the lights flicker across the buildings. A gentle breeze brushed against his face. He looked at the piano and whispered something to himself, too soft for anyone to hear. Maybe it was a thank you, maybe a prayer. He didn't know that across the internet people were searching for him. News stations, musicians, even old acquaintances who had lost touch with him years ago. The whole world was beginning to talk about the homeless man with the piano. But he wasn't thinking about fame or attention. He was thinking about how, for the first time in years, people had looked at him with kindness instead of pity. He had felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Dignity. The square was quiet again, just the hum of the city in the distance. He covered himself with his old blanket, leaned back against the piano and closed his eyes. Somewhere deep in his heart, the music still played softly, like a promise that life might still have something good waiting for him. And as he drifted into sleep, the city lights shimmered above him, and the piano stood silently by his side, the same piano that had given a forgotten man a voice again. The next day began with a strange calm in the air. The morning light spread across the city square, and the piano stood quietly as if waiting for someone. The man arrived a little later than usual. He walked slowly, his old coat hanging loosely on his shoulders. When he reached the piano, he paused for a moment, looking at it like an old friend. Something felt different. The street looked the same, but the people didn't. He noticed more faces than usual. A group of students stood nearby, whispering and holding their phones. A mother with a stroller sat on a bench waiting. Two men with cameras were setting up near the corner. The man didn't know that overnight. His story had appeared on television, and now the whole city wanted to see him. He sat down on the same small stool, unaware of the attention around him. His fingers hovered over the keys. A gentle sound came out as he pressed the first note. The crowd fell silent. The tune was soft, slow, and filled with emotion, the kind of sound that could make even the coldest heart stop and listen. As the music grew stronger, more people gathered. Some stood in silence, others recorded, and a few just closed their eyes to feel the melody. It was as if the entire square had transformed into a small concert hall. The man, however, seemed lost in his own world. His eyes were half closed, his expression calm but filled with something deep, something that words could never explain. He didn't know how much time had passed. He just played. Every note was like a piece of his life being shared with the people around him. There was pain in the way he pressed the lower keys, joy in the lighter ones, and a strange kind of peace in between. When the final note echoed into silence, the crowd erupted in applause. He looked up slowly, surprised by how many people were there. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. Someone shouted, "You're amazing!" Another said, "Play again." He smiled shyly, his face lit by the soft glow of the streetlights. He began another song, a brighter one this time, almost like sunshine after rain. People clapped in rhythm. Some even swayed gently with the tune. The energy in the air was different now. It wasn't just curiosity. It was connection. Strangers from all walks of life stood side by side, brought together by a man who had once been invisible. When he finished, a few people approached him. One of them was a reporter holding a microphone. "Sir," she said softly, "everyone wants to know more about you. Where did you learn to play like that?" He hesitated. His voice was quiet when he answered. "Long ago," he said. "I used to play when life was better." The crowd listened closely. The reporter continued, "You play beautifully. People all over the world are watching your video. You've touched millions of hearts." He looked confused. "Millions?" he repeated. The idea felt impossible to him. He had been living on the edge of the world for so long that he couldn't imagine anyone caring about his story. The reporter smiled. "Yes, your music is everywhere now. People want to know who you are." The man lowered his head for a moment. "I'm no one special," he said. "Just someone who used to love music." But the truth was deeper than that, deeper than anyone knew. Many years ago, before the streets became his home, he had been a musician with dreams. He used to play in small bars and at family gatherings. His music was once his joy, his escape, his future. But life had other plans. One night, a fire broke out in the building where he lived. He lost everything: his home, his instruments, and even the small savings he had kept. From that night, everything changed. He tried to rebuild his life, but one problem led to another. Work became harder to find, friends slowly drifted away, and soon he was left alone. The piano he once loved was gone, and so was the life he had built around it. But what truly broke him was not losing his home. It was losing his sense of purpose. The silence after the music stopped was unbearable, so he wandered the streets day after day, until he found a small square where an old piano sat forgotten. He would look at it from afar, too afraid to touch it, until that one night when something inside him whispered that it was time to play again. As he shared bits of his story with the reporter, people listened with quiet respect. Some were moved to tears. One man said softly, "You gave us something real. We needed that." The reporter thanked him for his time and promised to come back with good news. Before she left, she asked one last question. "Do you have a dream?" The man paused. A dream? He repeated. He looked at the piano, then at the crowd. Maybe, just to play again, to teach, to make people feel what I feel when I play. That would be enough. That night, the city's news broadcasted his full story, his past, his music, his words. The video spread even faster than before. People were amazed not just by his talent, but by his humility and kindness. Comments poured in from across the world. Musicians offered to collaborate. A local music school said they wanted to meet him. Donations started coming in to help him find shelter and a new piano. The next morning, when he arrived at the square, something unexpected happened. The piano had been cleaned. Someone had polished it, replaced a few broken keys, and left a note on top that said, "Thank you for reminding us that beauty still exists." He stared at the note for a long time. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the new keys. For a moment, he couldn't find words. Then, with tears in his eyes, he began to play again. The sound was clearer now, richer. The music filled the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Crowds gathered once more, but this time it wasn't just strangers. There were musicians, teachers, even a few people from the local radio station. Everyone wanted to meet the man whose music had touched so many hearts. One of them stepped forward and said, "We want to help you. You shouldn't be sleeping on the streets anymore. You deserve better." The man shook his head softly. "I don't need much," he said. "Just this piano." But deep inside he was moved by their kindness. It had been a long time since anyone had cared enough to offer help. For the first time in years he felt seen. He felt human again. The music continued late into the evening. The square became a place of joy. People came not just to listen, but to feel something pure, something they had lost in their busy lives. The man's songs carried messages of hope, forgiveness, and second chances. As the sky turned dark, a little girl approached him with a small flower. "Your music makes me happy," she said. He took the flower gently, smiling with tears in his eyes. "That means more than you know," he whispered. That night, when he sat alone beside the piano, he looked up at the stars and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Not for fame, not for money, but for the simple chance to play again. He had no idea that the next few days would bring even bigger changes, that someone from his past was already searching for him after seeing the video online. But for now, he just sat there under the soft light of the street lamps, his hands resting on the keys, feeling peace for the first time in a very long while. The city around him kept moving. Cars, voices, laughter, but in that small corner, time seemed to stand still. The man who once had nothing now had music again, and through it, he had found what he had been missing all along: connection, dignity, and hope. By the next morning, the city had already begun talking about the man at the piano. News channels replayed his video, and social media was filled with clips of him playing in the square. People couldn't stop sharing it. His music had become a symbol of hope, something pure in a world that often felt too busy to notice small miracles. But the man himself knew nothing about how big the story had become. He still came to the same spot, carrying the same old blanket and small bag, ready to play for whoever wanted to listen. He didn't play for fame or money. He played because music was all he had left. That morning, the square was busier than usual. Reporters had gathered near the benches. Some had microphones, others carried cameras. Curious people stood nearby, whispering and pointing toward the piano. When the man appeared, a small cheer rose from the crowd. He looked surprised. Usually, people didn't cheer when they saw him. He walked slowly toward the piano. Someone had placed fresh flowers on it, and a note taped to the side read, "Your music gives us hope." He touched the flowers gently, almost as if afraid they'd disappear. Then he sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The sound was soft at first, like the beginning of a story. Then, as his fingers found their rhythm, the melody grew stronger. The crowd grew silent. People lifted their phones to record, but even through the screens they could feel the emotion in his music. Every note spoke of something real: loss, struggle, and beauty hidden in pain. As he played, tears began to form in the eyes of strangers. Even those who didn't understand music felt something in their hearts. For a few minutes, all the noise of the city disappeared. There was only the piano and the man who made it sing, When the song ended, the crowd erupted in applause. People shouted words of encouragement. Some threw coins into his blanket. Others just stood there, hands over their hearts. One of the reporters stepped forward. "Sir," she said softly, "your video has reached millions. People are calling you the Piano Man of Hope. How do you feel about that?" He smiled faintly. "I don't know about hope," he said quietly. "I just play what's inside me." The reporter nodded. "Do you know that people from other countries are sending messages for you? They say your music helped them during difficult times." He looked down, his eyes glistening. "That's hard to believe," he whispered. But deep inside, something warm began to grow. Not pride, not surprise, but gratitude. For years he had felt invisible. Now somehow his music was touching hearts he would never meet. As the day went on, the crowd kept growing. Musicians came to see him. Some brought guitars and violins to play alongside him. The square turned into a small festival of kindness and sound. Laughter mixed with music. Strangers who had never spoken to each other were now talking, smiling, sharing food. It felt like the city had rediscovered something it had forgotten: humanity. By evening, a man wearing a dark jacket approached quietly. He stood in the back, watching closely. He wasn't a reporter or a curious bystander. He was someone from the man's past. He had been searching for him ever since the video went viral. They had once shared a stage years ago, before life had separated them. The man with the jacket didn't approach right away. He just listened. The moment the first note played, his eyes filled with emotion. He recognized the style, the soul behind it. It was unmistakable. It was his old friend, the one who had disappeared after the fire so many years ago. After the performance ended and the crowd began to thin out, the man finally walked forward. He waited until the piano player stood to stretch his arms, then said softly, "You haven't changed. Your hands still play the same way." The homeless man turned, startled. For a few seconds he couldn't speak. Then recognition spread across his face. "It can't be," he murmured. The two men stood there quietly, neither knowing what to say. The noise of the city seemed far away. The man in the jacket smiled sadly. "I've been looking for you," he said. "I saw your video online. I couldn't believe it. I thought you were gone." The pianist's voice trembled. "I thought I was too." They sat down on the bench together. The friend asked about what had happened, where he had been all these years, how he had ended up here. The pianist told him everything in simple words, without bitterness. He talked about losing his home, about the silence that had followed, and about finding this piano in the square. When he finished, his friend was quiet for a long time. Then he said softly, "You don't belong on the streets. You still have the gift. The world needs to hear you again." The man shook his head. "That world is gone for me," he said. "I'm not the same." His friend smiled gently. "Maybe not, but your music still is." That night, the two of them stayed there long after the crowd left. They played together for the first time in years. One on the piano, the other on a small guitar he had brought along. The sound was rough but beautiful, like two broken souls speaking in a language only they could understand. A few people passing by stopped to listen. Someone filmed them under the streetlights, unaware that they were capturing something special. A reunion. A miracle. The next morning, that new video also spread online. People recognized them. The old friends reunited through music. Offers began to pour in from music foundations, charities, and even television shows. Everyone wanted to help the man rebuild his life. But he didn't care much for fame. What mattered to him was that people were smiling again when they heard him play. For years he had believed that he no longer mattered. Now he realized that a single song could change more than he ever imagined. Within days, a local organization stepped forward. They offered him a small apartment and a chance to work as a piano teacher for children who couldn't afford lessons. When they told him the news, he was speechless. He stared at them in disbelief. "Teach?" he repeated softly. "You really think someone like me can teach?" The director smiled. "You've already taught the world something, how to find hope in the hardest places." Tears filled his eyes. He nodded slowly, unable to speak. That night, when he sat beside the piano again, he played a song that was new. Not sad, not broken, but full of quiet strength. It was the sound of healing. The crowd that gathered didn't just see a homeless man anymore. They saw a human being who had fought his way back to life. The piano gleamed under the soft streetlights and his hands moved with grace, as if thanking the world for listening. When he finished, he looked up at the people around him and said, "I used to think I had nothing, but maybe I was wrong. I had music all along. I just forgot how to share it." The crowd clapped again and some shouted his name, cheering. But he didn't bask in it. He simply smiled, his heart calm. He had no idea where this journey would lead next, but for the first time in years he wasn't afraid. That night, as he walked to his new room, he carried nothing but a small bag and the same old blanket. But this time it didn't feel heavy. The streetlights above him seemed softer, and the city, once cold and uncaring, now felt like home again. He knew that tomorrow he would return to the piano, not as a stranger, but as someone who had found his purpose again. Music had given him a second chance, and he was ready to live it fully. What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning, because soon, the world would invite him onto a stage once more, under bright lights, where he would share his story and remind everyone that no one is ever truly forgotten. And as the night grew quiet, the city slept, but somewhere in that small square, the piano stood waiting, its keys still echoing with the sound of hope that had begun with one man who refused to stop playing. Days turned into weeks, and the piano in the city square no longer stood alone. Every morning, people stopped by to see if the man would play. Children would sit cross-legged on the ground, waiting for that first soft note. Street vendors, office workers, and even tourists paused in their day just to listen. The place that was once cold and quiet had become full of warmth and sound. The man now lived in a small room at the edge of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it had a bed, a table, and a window that let in the morning light. After so many years of sleeping under the open sky, it felt like a miracle. Sometimes he would wake up early, still surprised that he had a roof over his head. He would make tea, sit by the window, and whisper to himself, "I'm still here." Every afternoon he went to the community center where he had started teaching piano. At first he was nervous. He wasn't used to being around people for long. But the children changed everything. They didn't care where he came from or what his past was. They only cared about the way his fingers danced on the keys. He taught them not just how to press the right notes, but how to feel the music. "Don't play with your fingers," he told them gently. "Play with your heart. Let the sound tell your story." One little boy raised his hand and asked, "What if I don't have a story?" The man smiled softly. "Then you will find one. Music helps you find it." Those words stayed with the children. The lessons were filled with laughter, mistakes, and small victories. Some days they played well. Other days the piano sounded like chaos, but the man didn't mind. For him, every wrong note was a step closer to something beautiful. Outside of class, people still recognized him on the streets. Sometimes strangers stopped to shake his hand or thank him for his music. A few offered him opportunities to perform, but he always hesitated. The square had become his stage and the city his audience. He didn't want to lose that simple connection. But one evening, his friend, the same man who had found him weeks ago, came to visit. He brought an envelope and placed it on the table. "There's something you should see," he said. Inside was a letter from a major music foundation. They wanted to invite him to perform at a charity concert. The event was being held to raise funds for homeless shelters across the country. Thousands of people were expected to attend, and they wanted him to be the main performer. The man read the letter twice. His hands trembled slightly. "Me?" he said quietly. "Why me?" His friend smiled. "Because your story changed people. Your music gave them hope. They want others to hear it too." He looked down at the letter again. The thought of standing on a stage with lights and cameras filled him with both excitement and fear. He hadn't performed in front of a large crowd in years. What if he froze? What if his hands failed him? But deep down, he knew this was his chance to give back, to use his gift to help others who were still struggling like he once did. He nodded slowly. "All right," he whispered. "I'll do it." The next few weeks were a blur of practice and preparation. The organizers arranged for him to rehearse in a proper music hall. When he walked in for the first time, he stopped in awe. The polished grand piano stood in the center of the room, shining under the soft lights. He touched it gently, as if afraid it might vanish. He began to play, softly at first, then stronger. The empty hall filled with sound, every note echoing off the high walls. Memories flooded back, his youth, his dreams, the years of silence. But this time he wasn't playing for himself. He was playing for everyone who had ever felt invisible. The night of the concert arrived. The hall was packed with people. The audience buzzed with excitement, not knowing what to expect. Some had seen his viral videos. Others had only heard rumors about the piano man who had once lived on the streets. Backstage, he sat quietly, breathing deeply. His friend placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've already won," he said softly. "No matter what happens out there, you've already changed the world." The lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Please welcome the man whose music reminded us of hope." Applause filled the air. The man walked onto the stage, his heart pounding. The bright lights made it hard to see the faces, but he could feel their energy, warm, welcoming, kind. He sat down at the piano. For a long moment, he just stared at the keys. Then he closed his eyes and began to play. The music started slow, like a whisper, then grew stronger, deeper, full of emotion. Every note carried a memory. The nights he spent on the streets, the loneliness, the small kindnesses from strangers, the moment he found his way back. The melody rose and fell like waves, full of sorrow and light. The audience was silent. Some leaned forward, some wiped tears from their eyes. It was as if time itself had paused to listen. When he reached the final note, it lingered in the air for a moment before fading away. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the entire hall erupted in applause. Thunderous, endless applause. People stood, cheering and clapping, shouting his name. He looked up, overwhelmed. His eyes shimmered and he smiled, a smile full of peace. He stood, bowed deeply, and whispered, "Thank you." After the show, reporters surrounded him again, asking questions. One asked, "What does this moment mean to you?" He thought for a while, then said softly, "It means I was never truly lost. I just needed someone to listen." The charity concert raised enough money to open several new shelters in different cities. But for him, the true reward wasn't the fame or the recognition. It was seeing people come together, inspired by something as simple as music. In the following months, he continued to teach at the community center. More children joined his classes, eager to learn. He never turned anyone away, no matter their background or ability. His students loved him, not because he was famous, but because he believed in them. Sometimes when the lessons ended, he would take a walk back to the square where it had all begun. The old piano was still there, though a bit worn from weather and time. He would sit down and play quietly, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft colors. Passers-by still stopped to listen. One evening, a young woman approached him after he finished playing. She was holding a small notebook. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "Your music helped me through a hard time. It made me believe that things can get better." He smiled gently. "That's what music is for," he replied. "To remind us that we're not alone." As she walked away, he looked up at the fading light. For the first time in years, he felt completely at peace. The world had been cruel, but it had also been kind. He had lost everything once, but through music, he had found something far more precious: connection. That night, before leaving the square, he placed his hand on the piano one last time. "Thank you," he whispered, as if speaking to an old friend. Then he turned and walked down the street, his figure slowly fading into the glow of the streetlights. The piano remained there, silent for now, but still full of stories. And sometimes when the wind passed through the square, it almost sounded like the faint echo of his melody. A song of hope, born from pain, carried by love and remembered by all who had once stopped to listen.